welcome to the Q&A session with Simon here. Thank you for coming and joining the pair of us. For format, we've got about 25 minutes. I'm going to ask a couple of questions that popped up for me while Simon was doing his talk, but I want to get really quickly to you guys, so please make sure you prepare your questions so that when I come to you, there's plenty of you to choose from. This is a recorded session, so there's going to be someone with a microphone, I'm told, gentleman at the back here. So please don't ask your question until you have your microphone so that we can capture everything that you're saying, even if you have a loud accent like mine. Doesn't matter. Please make sure you wait for the microphone. Okay, so Simon, first question. I should introduce myself. Some random woman up on stage. I'm Gemma. I'm a tech and science journalist. I'm based down in London. Got involved with this because I'm currently, just finished writing my first book. We were just sharing our book horror stories around trying to finish them. Luckily, my manuscript is complete. Sorry, pal. I got in touch with Dawn because I was looking for an anthropologist. The theme of my book is about hype. So even though I cover tech and science, I was curious about the role that hype plays in the way that technology develops, and I wanted to learn about status. So she helped me out a lot with that, and now I'm here. Okay, so the first question that I had for you, Simon, when you were speaking was, you came on stage and introduced to us this idea of the body versus the mind. And I couldn't help but wondering where the impetus for your choice of keynote or choice of research came from. Is it born out of frustration with certain people saying certain things, or where does it kind of come from?
Oh, lots of things are born out of frustration. So I, in a way, actually, it wasn't so much about tech. I mean, because I'm a consultant, for a living, and it's always struck me. It does relate to embodiment, but it's always struck me that the main thing that consultants build is slide decks, right? And that for me, they get you as a consultant to go off, if you're someone like me, to go and do ethnography, go and do research, make sense of it all, and then write them a deck. And then there's this kind of idea that magically what you've written in a deck suddenly gets turned into some change in an organisation. And I think as a business, what we realised was that actually if you were to take people with you and they experience the same things that you experienced, they would come to a better understanding of what it was you'd experienced. So we started to talk about that as a form of embodied strategy. So, the idea that strategy doesn't live in documents, but actually lives in forms of experiences and understandings that you can only get if you embody the kind of phenomenon that you're interested in trying to understand. So we did this ridiculous project where we took a bunch of people from Duracell camping in Southern California, and they wanted to understand. Oh my God! They wanted to understand the outdoor world, and we said, well, if you want to understand that, we can either go off and do it for you and come back and tell you what it's all about, or you can come with us. So we rented some campers and some tents, and then we spent the weekend in a cold desert-like environment learning about the outdoors. So embodiment then just became this kind of idea, really, that as a business we've just sort of made a part of how we go about giving people understandings of the world. And then from that, it was a sort of short hop into the nightmare of writing a book.
Which I can definitely relate to. So this conference is obviously closely tied to AI, ethical AI, responsible AI. And I was curious, your example that you gave around the self-driving car, or the car in general, and the human experience of driving a car versus the difficulties of building a self-driving car. I'm curious as to what you believe then the role of AI is, because I suppose what I was thinking in my head is, what's worse, human error or non-perfect AI-powered self-driving car, and therefore how do you see AI?
I think in best case I see AI as a co-worker. So I think the thing for me, because you're not going to put this thing back into the cupboard and lock it and say, right, well, we're not doing AI anymore. It's here, it's among us, it's gonna be a thing. So the thing for me is about if we recognise what we can do and why we can do it and why we might be better at it, or we should be doing it more than we should allow other things to do it, then we can kind of, do some kind of resource allocation, if you will, and say, okay, well, it turns out that AIs are very good at recognising malignant tumours. That's expensive. It takes a lot of time. We've got machine learning that can now do this. Great. Now we can deploy consultants elsewhere to do the patient stuff, which I hope never gets done by an AI-led interaction, right? So for me, it is about kind of finding kind of what the right roles are, and then getting comfortable with the idea that we need to kind of co-work or collaborate with AIs. I don't know if that answers the question. So, and I think that's part of an ongoing kind of conversation that's we're obviously now in the thick of, which is what are those roles, and where are we comfortable kind of handing off, and where are we less comfortable, and why. But it seems to me at the moment that, as often happens in the tech industry, it's kind of a bulldozer of hype, which sort of says that all this stuff can be done for us. Hence, you get the kind of AI is going to take all our jobs type discourse. And that's patently not the case. I mean, I imagine, I'm hoping my kids will all become plumbers, because, I can't see AI being a good plumber. And so there are lots of things that we're always going to be able to do. I think they will tend to be the practical things that do require, very much the body. So yeah, it's about figuring out kind of where we each have our respective roles, and it makes most sense for those roles to be kind of divided out, and then to figure out a way of learning to live with others, doing some of these things for us or with us.
I think that's an interesting point you said about making a decision as to what we're happy to hand off, and I suppose tying in a little bit with Joanna's talk after, it seems that her sort of line, although she's not here to defend herself, it seems like her line there is that's the role of legislation or of governments, is to sort of make decisions around that. How do you hand off? You're saying kids want to be a plumber. Well, what does that mean in terms of I don't know, self-fulfillment versus productivity versus money? You just see what I mean?
Well, luckily we've got an amazing government at the moment, so I mean, it's all going to be fine. No, I mean, I think more seriously, it filters through into lots of different bits of policy, right? I mean, if you look at kind of the way the British education system's been set up over, many, many decades, there's sort of, in the old days, kind of smart people went to grammar school, and then there were kind of secondaries moderns, and then there was kind of, technicals, and it was kind of like, oh, well, there's the body at the bottom, like that's the stuff for kind of less clever people. Yeah. So I think, there's a really obvious kind of policy manifestation of kind of mind and body, right, which is, intelligence is there and you go there, and the body's the kind of menial stuff, and that goes over there. So, I mean, what a mess we're in. I don't really know kind of how we can do anything with policy while we're in the current situation. But I think those are the sorts of decisions that right from education through will filter into kind of how these sorts of decisions get made. I have increasingly less faith that we are ruled by people that can make those decisions. So that's why these kinds of settings are important, because I think it's got to be ground up, actually, more than anything.
Got it. Okay, let's go to you guys, because I'm conscious of time and I want to make sure I'm in. Yes, we've got a question here, gentleman at the front. 2 seconds. We're going to wait on the microphone. Thank you.
I was very interested in what you said, where you brought the body into this conversation, which I thought very, very interesting and relevant. What I'm interested in is you spoke about the body as almost being this kind of saving, fundamental, beneficial, positive element, which it clearly is to an extent. But also, it seems to me that the body is very much part of the problem, and that we're very much controlled and manipulated through our bodies, and that we're still very much linked to instinctive and intuitive responses to circumstances and situations, which are kind of very primeval in many ways. As the world changes and as society changes, and to some extent, that people like Donald Trump and so on, and Johnson and people like that, they are using our bodies to exploit us and to manipulate us. And I wondered to what extent you looked at the less positive impact of the body in that.
Yeah, no, that's
nice question.
Yeah, no, good question, difficult one. So I think there's clearly, the sort of, I don't know if you know the work of kind of Daniel Kahneman's sort of system 1 and system 2 thinking. So he kind of sets up this idea that we have sort of system 1 thinking, which is the rapid, intuitive kind of way that humans respond to to things and make decisions and solve problems. And then system 2 thinking, which is a little bit more deliberative and requires sort of different cognitive skills. And it's interesting, I talked about the firefighter. So the firefighter guy, Gary Klein, talks about kind of intuition as this amazing, I can intuit when the building's going to collapse. And there's a very nice piece, I'll tweet it, but there's a really nice debate that I think McKinsey kind of published between them about these kind of different systems of thinking. And it's clearly the case, and I'm very much aware of the fact that kind of this intuitive, we've got a very gut instinct type set of politicians around us at the moment, which, as you say, typify this kind of system 1. Yeah, it just feels right. Let's do it. And a distaste for kind of experts who can be a bit more thoughtful about decisions and the evidence and so forth. So I think you're right. There are kind of limits to the body and its instinctive responses to stuff, and we need, as ever, we need a bit of both, right? There's other bits of the body that I think your question kind of touches on, which of course, the body's very much at the centre of how people are subjugated, how people are abused, bodies are weak, they're subject to kind of power. Foucault talks brilliantly about the body and power. So it's not necessarily a kind of a completely rosy picture. And at this point in time, I think I would just acknowledge that. I think you're absolutely right to point out that there are weaknesses in the thesis, if you will, or other things that we need to take into account. Does that sort of answer the question?
Another question from the floor. I was also thinking while you were speaking, I also think this comes back to regulation, by the way. If you look at things like subliminal advertising, it's, that's illegal for a reason, but we don't have regulation around UX designers quite the same way, yet they're using the same methodologies. Another question from the audience. Anyone else got, because I have another one stored here in case. Oh, no, we've got one in the corner here. Sorry, you weren't fast enough, but I'll come to you next.
Sure. Simon, hi, I'm a roboticist. Thanks for not making too cheap a joke earlier on. Now, I wonder if you'd thought about, you mentioned the 5 traits that you feel make humans good at driving. So coming at it as an autonomous systems builder, I see the flip side of that. There's a reason why there's 3,000 people plus a year die in the UK, 30,000 plus in the US and so on. Because, we're not necessarily that good all the time at some of those things, and, that's sort of borne out by the statistics. I think that's where maybe there's an interesting overlap. Those weaknesses could be augmented by some of the technology. Have you thought about some of the weaknesses in those areas and where technology might help?
Not enough, no. I think it goes back to what I was saying. It's about this co-working idea, right? Which is, where are the areas where, there are weaknesses in driving. Being male, I quite readily accept the fact that men think, for example, that they're better at driving than women. And I don't agree, but so immediately you get this kind of this bias, right, of like, I can go really fast and take this corner at this speed, and I think it's already the case that cars are able to kind of intervene in meaningful ways where where our judgment doesn't sort of hold up to the reality of the road that we're on and the conditions we're in. So yeah, I think for me ultimately it is about finding these areas where the human instinct or the human's unwavering self-belief, as it were, runs out of road, if you pardon the pun, and where kind of systems can sort of intervene on our behalf. I think what is the case though, and I think it's well understood in aviation and other areas, that as we increasingly de-skill, the classic kind of Air France crash over the Pacific or the South Atlantic, it was a really good example of what happens when people don't actually fly the planes anymore and are kind of essentially de-skilled. So I think that's the danger, that there has to be a point at which we're saying, like, are these humans here just to monitor something else that's flying a machine? And if so, then what does that really mean? Because if we create a world in which a lot of stuff is just running around us and we're purely monitoring it for exceptions, we end up, in this case, sadly, at the bottom of the sea. So I think it's a very lazy answer, but it's a bit of both. But it's finding those things, and those are policy decisions, they're manufacturing decisions, they're design decisions, which are all ultimately exceptionally political, and they don't happen quite as much. Although working in the belly of the beast, I see that these conversations do have some tenacity. They are being played out, and I think it's easy to assume that tech companies are kind of unthinkingly just doing stuff, and often that's not the case. They do hire people that can provide, frameworks and ways of thinking about stuff, so that politics does and ethics do take place. Those sorts of discussions do take place.
If we switch the microphone up to the lady in the middle there, who was first with her question, just while you get the microphone, I was just thinking.
Run it back because his microphone's not working at the moment, so it doesn't work for you, and I will run it down so that you can.
Okay, well, I'll say something, then you can say something, and while you're doing that, you can sort the microphone. I was just thinking as well, another point I think is great what you've done today, Simon, by highlighting the pros, I guess, of the body, and we talk a lot about the cons of the body as well. I think we don't necessarily give the same amount of time to the pros and cons and reality of technology, and you talked about hype earlier on. I've just wrote an entire book on hype, and of course there's an AI chapter, and part of my argument is that we don't actually realise what AI even is half the time. We don't even talk about the fact that it's essentially a database analytics tool. That is literally what it is. It's not anything more than that. So I think having talks like Simon's and applying it the same to AI, I think would be a good way of allowing us to understand the true possibilities of both the body and the AI, and then be able to come up with solutions that fit the right points, or at least that's how I think about these sorts of things. Hello.
We'll repeat the question.
Yeah, sure. So I'm an anthropologist as well, and I study the body, so I was really interested.
I hope I got it right.
And a little bit of what I was thinking about was kind of the changing and plastic nature of the body, and the idea that the body is always shaped and shaping society and culture. And I was wondering a little bit around the argument that you used for kind of post-human terms of the human body, the kind of cyborg theory, and the idea that basically we're all cyborgs now. If you have a pacemaker, you wear contact lenses, or you use an iPhone, it's basically an extension of yourself. So I was wondering a little bit around your thoughts around how that actually changes the notion of embodied intelligence, now that we're arguably more connected, I guess, to tech than we've ever been before.
Yeah, so that's a question about, sort of post-human bodies and cyborgian realities. One of the things I didn't do in the talk is actually add in a third component. So if you've got bodies and minds, you've also got environments, right? And I think there's a really interesting body of work, primarily a guy called Andy Clark and a guy called Chalmers, I don't know his first name. Anyway, but they talk about the extended mind, and they talk about the way in which the mind extends out into our environment. So when they were first writing, they talked about filofaxes. I don't know if anyone's old enough here to remember what a filofax is. And then, of course, they talked about smartphones and the ways in which, whether it's just lists before you go to the shop or diaries or whatever it is, these are essentially ways of kind of offloading kind of cognitive function or ability or tasks into the world around us. Which of course is what a lot of design work, whether it's boats or ships or planes or whatever else is doing, is essentially putting a lot of what needs to be here or here out into the world around us. And so I guess in a roundabout way, I would say a good way to think about that is through this idea of the extended mind, and to pay attention to the environments we're in, and think of them, as you say, not as mere objects, but actually as kind of a continuum of kind of mind and body. And I think that, if you're in the business of design, if you're in the business of user experience, if you're in the business of building things, you need to think much more about the extent to which the material world around us is in a sense a part of our overall kind of cognitive setup, right? Go back to the Air France plane, you know, that was an extended mind around them. It happened to be a mind that had its own way of thinking about what was going on, and what therefore happened was, you know, people started to misread what the instruments were saying, and make decisions that were completely counterintuitive, actually. So I don't know whether that answers the question. At least it turns it around in a way that it makes me able to answer it. But the extended mind, I think, is a fascinating kind of area, and one that has massive applicability to the kind of the worlds that we're now in the business of designing.
We've technically gone over our time, but does anyone have any quick final questions they're dying to get in? Yes, the lady here. Oh, yeah. We're just going to get in trouble. It's fine. It's my fault, not yours.
It should be working if you speak right into the mic.
Okay.
There we go.
So, yeah, I'm glad there was an anthropologist who asked a question here. I sort of feel a bit like anthropology's got a little bit lost in this conference so far, and you're the representative of anthropologists so far. So, as you know, anthropology has two sides. It has the theoretical side and the empirical side, so ethnographic research. And you've been talking a lot about anthropological theory, or theory that's been used in anthropology, and which is very interesting, but I want to kind of know a little bit more, maybe other people might be interested also in what else anthropologists can offer to the tech industry beyond kind of theorizing about the body, but more about actually, you know, going out there, spending time with communities or people who, you know, who this research relates to, and kind of using that information to inform technology. So kind of a question for people who maybe are anthropologists or want to know about what more anthropologists can do.
Well, you can come work for us. I mean, that's what we do, you know, and we're not alone. And I've been doing it for nearly 20 years, and lots of companies have lots and lots of anthropologists or other, you know, flavors of social scientists. And a lot of the work that we do is essentially not doing this, you know, as I discussed earlier, not doing it alone, but doing it with the people that are going to be building things. Or it's being representatives of others in conversations that are happening in large organizations. And so there is an enormously broad kind of practical world of anthropology that does exist, has existed for much longer than the most journalists actually credit it for existing, and it is given kind of material, practical form every day of the week in most of the companies that have already been discussed today. So it's happening. It's been happening for years, and my personal belief is the more that we get people who are responsible for building these things to get out into the world and to embody the phenomena, the objects that they are trying to kind of change or design or form, the better place will be, because too much of this work goes on in isolated campuses where employees are bused to work. They just don't see the world around them in the same sorts of ways. So I'm all about taking people out of that bubble and saying, no, this is the world that you're designing for. These are the hopes, desires, ambitions, troubles, strifes, worlds that people are in. This is the world that you're designing for, not, you know, the sprint that you're involved in because it's your half-year goal and you need to build something and ship it. So that's my answer, which is just roll up your sleeves, get people out into the world. It's not that complicated. It's already happening, but we need much, much more of it.
Just to add one thing, if you're asking about sort of practice, I'm obviously not an anthropologist, but from my perspective, you know, I'm a journalist covering tech, and it took me a while when I was covering a particular topic to realise, oh, I think this maybe sits in anthropology. I've never studied it. I studied mathematics at university, and you know, not to put the impetus back onto you guys, but at the same time, I would say that the practical thing is to put yourself into the spaces that the technologists and the scientists are in as well, because they're not going to think to come to you. unfortunately, in the same way that you guys might not think to go to them. And I think so. It comes back to this idea of silos. Like, we can criticise technologists and scientists. I do it as part of my job for being very, very siloed and not thinking outside the box and so on and so forth. But the people and the professions that are managing to shift that are the ones that are turning up at, you know, TechCrunch Disrupt San Francisco and going, hello, can I do a talk on stage about anthropology? So I would, you know, you're very welcome. People want to hear from other sides, genuinely, but they don't always know where to look or the people who are the right ones to ask.
One place to look, there's a website called epicpeople.org, so epicpeople.org. 500-600 people turn up every year to a conference. There's 5,000-6,000 members. It's a worldwide community of people bringing social science into the world of business. There's 15 years of brilliant papers from practitioners. It's amazing. A quick word search on there and you'll find that most of the stuff that I've talked about today in industry and elsewhere has all been covered. So go and have a look. And Rita Denny, I don't know whether she's here, but she runs Epic half of her time. So you can grab her, but it's a brilliant community, an amazing resource. So go and feed your mind and body.
Thank you for the question, though. Awesome. Thank you guys for coming on to the Q&A. I think we're going to head on to the Petra Kucha stuff, and I think we've got a little bit of time if you want to switch your room or stay in this room or pee or whatever you want to do in your time. Thank you guys for listening, for showing up.
Thank you for coming.